Europe's long dream of unity. To understand why Europe chose a shared currency, we have to step away from economics for a moment and look at history. Because the euro was not born from spreadsheets. It was born from fear. Fear of repetition. Fear of memory. Fear that Europe, left to itself, would destroy itself again. By the middle of the 20th century, Europe was exhausted. 2 world wars had torn the continent apart in less than 30 years. Cities were flattened, borders were redrawn, entire generations were lost. And the wars were not accidents. They followed a pattern. Europe was a continent of powerful nations packed tightly together, each competing for resources, security, and prestige. When economies weakened, politics hardened. When politics hardened, conflict followed. By 1945, this cycle had become undeniable. After the war, a different question. When the guns finally fell silent in 1945, Europe's leaders asked a new kind of question. Not, how do we recover? But, how do we prevent this from ever happening again? The answer they arrived at was not military. It was structural. They believed that if European nations became economically dependent on one another, war would become not just unthinkable, but impossible. A country does not bomb its own supply chain. The first experiment, coal and steel. In 1951, 6 countries, France, West Germany, Italy, Belgium, the Netherlands and Luxembourg, took a radical step. They placed control of coal and steel production under a shared authority. These were not symbolic industries. Coal-powered factories. Steel-built weapons. By sharing control over them, the very materials of war were removed from national hands. This was the European coal and steel community. It worked, not because it erased national identity, but because it aligned incentives. France could no longer secretly rearm against Germany. Germany could not rebuild its war machine without oversight. Trust grew, not from goodwill, but from structure. Economic cooperation becomes habit. Over the next decades, cooperation expanded. Trade barriers fell, customs unions formed, labor and capital moved more freely. In 1957, the Treaty of Rome created the European Economic Community. The goal was simple: shared prosperity would reduce conflict. And for a time, it worked remarkably well. Europe grew, living standards rose, war between major European powers became unthinkable. To many, this seemed like proof that integration was the answer, the hidden shift in purpose. But something subtle began to change. Economic cooperation slowly transformed into political ambition. What began as a peace project started to resemble a unification project. The logic was persuasive. If shared markets brought peace, then shared institutions might lock that peace in permanently. And if shared institutions worked, why not share the most powerful institution of all, money? Why currency looked like the final step. By the late 20th century, European leaders faced a dilemma. Their economies were deeply intertwined, but their currencies were not. Exchange rates fluctuated. Devaluations created tension. Economic shocks in one country spilled into others. A shared currency promised order. No more currency wars, no more competitive devaluations, no more sudden exchange rate shocks. Just stability. For countries that had lived through inflation, depression and war, stability was not an abstract goal. It was emotional, Germany's central role. Germany stood at the center of this vision. After World War II, Germany rebuilt itself into Europe's industrial engine. But its history left scars. The hyperinflation of the 1920s had destroyed savings, undermined democracy, and paved the way for extremism. To Germans, Inflation was not just an economic problem, it was a political threat. This shaped everything. Germany insisted that any shared currency must be hard, disciplined, immune to political pressure. The future European currency would be modelled on the German mark. Strong, stable, unyielding, the political trade-off. For southern European countries, this was a trade. They gained access to cheap credit, stable exchange rates, and membership in Europe's inner circle. In return, they accepted rules that limited flexibility. Many believed convergence would happen naturally, that productivity would rise, that economies would align, that discipline would replace adjustment. The belief was sincere. But belief is not a plan. The Maastricht moment. In 1992, the vision became law. The Maastricht Treaty laid the foundation for a single currency. It imposed rules on deficits, debt, and inflation. On paper, the system looked sound, but it rested on an assumption that had never been tested, that all members would behave as if they were the same economy. History suggested otherwise, but history at that moment felt distant. Peace had changed expectations. For nearly 50 years, Europe had known only peace. A generation had grown up without war, without collapse, without systemic crisis. Success bred confidence, and confidence bred risk. The architects of the euro believed they were finishing Europe's post-war project. They were not trying to erase nations. They were trying to prevent the past from returning. What they underestimated was not economics, it was stress. Because systems are not defined by how they perform in calm conditions. They are defined by how they respond under pressure. Setting the stage. By the end of the 1990s, the decision was made. The currency would launch. The institutions would follow. The details would be resolved later. Europe chose unity first and flexibility second. In the next chapter, we arrive at the moment this choice became irreversible. January 1st, 1999. The day Europe locked itself into a system. That would only reveal its limits years later. If you're finding value in this breakdown, like the video to support the series. Subscribe to Uncle Chris Tales for history built on causes, not headlines. And in the next chapter, we examine the day the rules officially changed.